Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of the Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are talking about tidying up your family history. Some of you may have caught on to the tidying up or decluttering craze going on right now. And in family history, certainly decluttering is never a bad idea. So today we are going to talk about some of the things that you can declutter, some ways to do that, and then some tips for keeping organized going forward. Let's go ahead and dive in. So the first thing we want to talk about is cleaning up your family trees. A lot of us have been doing this for a long time. Some of us have just been doing this for a little bit of time. But the idea is that we may have accumulated lots of copies of our family tree over time. So here are just some things that you can check for. The first one is on Ancestry, go to Create and Manage Trees. It's going to be in the Trees drop-down menu. And what you're looking for there is to see if you have duplicate copies of your family tree. One of the things that I sometimes see happen is that we have these old copies of our family trees that we may have put online years ago, or that we may have copied from a family member and imported into Ancestry. And sometimes what I see happening for some of you is that you might have 2 or 3 copies of your tree, and you sometimes work in different copies. And so those trees might not all be the same information. So for some of you, this might take a little bit of work. For others of you, this might just be a means of going through and cleaning out some of that duplicate stuff that's just kind of cluttering up your tree list. The other thing you want to check is not just the trees that you've created on your account, but also in that same Create and Manage Trees space, there is a tab called Trees Shared With Me. Look through that. You may have had trees shared with you by someone you were communicating with years ago, or by a DNA match who shared it with you with or without your knowledge. You may have trees in there that you don't need access to anymore, and so there's a little link right there. You can just click Remove to remove yourself from having access to that tree. Again, it's just a really quick and easy way to declutter that tree space that you're working with. Another thing that some of you might want to check has to do with the trees on your computer. So several of us, myself included, use desktop genealogy software. I happen to use Family Tree Maker. Roots Magic also syncs with Ancestry, and so we keep a copy of our family tree from Ancestry online or offline on our computer. What happens though is that every time I close my program, it makes a backup. The first of every month, I make a backup. So I end up with a lot of superfluous files kind of cluttering up my computer. And so it's a really good idea to just go through those once in a while and see, are there any that are just duplicates? Are there any old files I need to delete? Now, of course, anytime you're deleting something, you want to be really careful that you're deleting what needs to be deleted and not deleting what you want to keep. But for those of us who are a little bit of neat freaks, going through that process helps us to just declutter. And I don't know about you, but for me, decluttering actually frees up brain space, not just hard drive space. So it's a really useful exercise to go through. Next, we're going to talk about the duplicate media files on your computer. So when you have a desktop software program, one of the things that you can do is you can set it to download media from your online tree at Ancestry to your computer. That's fantastic. The problem is what happens sometimes is we end up with duplicate files for multiple reasons. Sometimes it's because we did something and then we re-uploaded a new tree to Ancestry, and now we're syncing that new tree with our software, and yet the old media files are still sitting there, again, clogging up and cluttering up the hard drives on our computer. Sometimes, like for me, I had scanned a whole bunch of images for my family history and then started attaching them to my tree. And what happened is when my tree then synced with my software, it was creating a duplicate of that image in my tree folders as well as in the picture folders where I had originally scanned them. So I ended up with multiple copies of all of those files. It's kind of a tedious process to go through and compare information and decide what we want to keep and what we don't want to keep. But man, it does. It frees up hard drive space and brain space, and it makes things feel a little bit fresher and easier to manage. Next, we're going to talk about duplicate people in your online tree. So besides just having duplicate trees and maybe some duplicate files, over time you may have also sometimes ended up with some duplicate people in your tree. There's a lot of different ways this can happen. As a matter of fact, I have an entire video where I talk about how to prevent duplicates and how if you have duplicates, how to manage them or how to merge them. We don't ever want to delete duplicate people in our tree. We always want to merge them. That's the key thing to remember. But if you want a more deep dive into that topic, be sure to go check out that video here on the YouTube channel. And then the other way that we can clean up our family trees is to check for errors in your family tree. Now, there are some simple things that you can do online to look for errors. Simply putting your tree into pedigree view instead of the family view will allow you to go through your tree one generation at a time and make sure that you've got logical information. Sometimes we get so excited about finding a new hint or a new leaf or a new potential parent, or we get so excited about some information we may have found in a book or in a record online that we don't analyze it really carefully. And we end up adding information that doesn't make sense into our family tree. For example, I seriously doubt that your grandpa got married when he was 4 years old, or that your grandma had a child when she was 72. And yet, sometimes we see those errors creep into some of our online family trees. And I am not immune from this. My biggest struggle is to make sure that when I am entering dates that I type them in correctly, because I have a habit of transposing numbers. And now somebody who was supposed to have been born in 1852 all of a sudden was born in 1582, and things just don't make sense in my tree. So just going through your tree every once in a while and looking for some of those errors of logic or errors of data entry is a really good way to start to clean up your tree. Now, if you're really serious about cleaning up your family tree, some of the desktop software programs, again, such as Family Tree Maker or Roots Magic that sync with Ancestry, they have what are called data error reports. So I can go into Family Tree Maker, for example, and it will run a check on like 20 some odd different things about my family tree to see if there are some basic errors that I can go investigate. Now, sometimes they're really easy to clean up because it's super obvious, like I transposed a number. Sometimes it's a little trickier. One of the challenges that I just fixed this last week was I had a woman who was too young, way too young, to be the mother of some children that I had assigned to her. And what I didn't realize was that even though she was listed as their mother in a census, I hadn't taken the time to do the math and realize that she was in fact the second wife and only the mother of the younger children. She wasn't the mother of the older children. She couldn't have been because she was way too young to have been their mother. So little things like that that sometimes creep in because we just don't pay close enough attention when we're attaching records. Certainly something that we can take some time to clean up in this age of tidying up. Next, let's talk about cleaning up those paper piles, okay? I know how easy it is to all of a sudden be surrounded by paper when you are interested in family history. Now, certainly it's not as rampant of a problem, I would guess, as it was 20 or 30 years ago. When I first started doing family history, there was very little, if anything, online. There wasn't an online, actually, when I started. And so what happens is we start keeping these little scratch papers of notes. We start copying record information. I would print stuff off constantly. When I got my first copy of the 1880 U.S. Federal Census on CD, it was actually a bunch of CDs. It was a giant book of CDs. I think my parents gave it to me for maybe my 30th birthday. I was so excited about that. But I would copy, like hand copy into blank census forms, the information from the census records so that I could file it and stick it in notebooks. And I had so many papers. I actually had an entire bookshelf and several filing cabinets in a room in my office where I would do my family history research at home that were dedicated to that. And it just got way out of control. Now that most of that information is available online, or at least that census information at the least, what I find myself doing is just attaching the record, making really detailed notes in my tree, and then I let that be enough. Because what happens then is I have the information in my tree, the data, I have the notes that I've transcribed out of the census in my tree, I've attached the record to my tree, and then I've synced my tree with my desktop software. What that means then is that I also have a copy of the image on my hard drive. I don't need to print it out. I then take that Family Tree Maker file once a month with all the media and I back it up. I save that to the cloud. I save it to a hard drive. So I have some backups of that information, but I just really don't feel the need to print all the things anymore. So I've been able to help mitigate the paper piles by just printing a lot less. Now that said, every once in a while I will print out portions of my family tree. I'll print them out in a book, like through Ancestry. If you click on extras, you can go to photo books and posters, and that takes you to a service called My Canvas. And one of the things that you can do there is actually print several generations of your family tree in a book format that then is bound and you can have printed for you. That will include, you can, if you choose, include census records and draft cards and passenger lists and the newspaper clippings and whatever else that you've found. And then it's in a bound book telling a story about a particular branch of your family tree instead of just file cabinets or notebooks full of printed information. I find that that's a much more reasonable way for me to tackle the paper pile monster. So my next tip for you to help clean up paper piles is make a plan for reviewing your old papers. For those of you who've been at this for a while or who maybe are brand new to this but inherited some things from a grandmother or an aunt, go through some of that paper, right? Look at those old paper pedigree charts and the old family group sheets. Compare that against your online tree. Make sure you've copied that data over from those papers into your online tree and then throw the papers away. Some of them are just clutter. Now, some of them are going to be important. You're going to have things like interviews maybe that were done or random research notes that you'll need to really go through and figure out how can I transfer this information. But most of it you're not going to need. So once you get that information off that piece of paper transferred, throw the paper away. Now, there are some things you will not want to throw away. However, you may have boxes or folders full of old documents. So for example, I have my great-grandmother's baptismal certificate from when she was baptized as a child into the Lutheran Church in Texas. That's a giant piece of old parchment that's colored and rich and has signatures and handwriting from some of my, it's just important to me. I'm not going to ever throw that away. However, I have scanned it. Sometimes I'll just take a photo of it with my cell phone. Sometimes I actually will take some of these documents and have them professionally scanned. But however you choose to do it, scan those old documents and photos. One of the things that I find really heartbreaking is when some kind of natural disaster or tragedy strikes, oftentimes people haven't scanned all those old documents or photos and they're lost forever. And so even though I want to keep these particular papers, I make sure that I've got digital copies of them as well so that I have that particular record available online should anything happen. Now, once you've scanned those old photos and documents, maybe one of the things that you can do to tidy up is figure out which ones of those things you really love. Which one of them, is there a document or a photo of a particular ancestor that you really connect with? And then find ways to frame those or display them somewhere in your home. Because as wonderful as it is that you have that information, having it locked away always isn't always the best thing. If it's something that you love and connect with and want to preserve, maybe display it somewhere in your home so that you can remember why it is that you love these people, so that you can remember why it is that you connect with these people. Finally, I just want to give you some tips on some ongoing organization. I love this quote by A.A. Milne. Organizing is what you do before you do something so that when you do it, it's not all mixed up. So for those of you who are brand new into family history, or for those of you who've gone through this process of tidying up already, now is the time to really have some processes in place to keep it from getting crazy again, right? So that it doesn't get all mixed up. So here are some of my tips for staying organized. The first one is set aside a specific time each week or each month to tackle organization. There are things that you'll just want to be able to go through and declutter or clean up or make sure you get transferred into your family tree. And if you have a regular appointment with yourself to do that, you're more likely to actually get it done. Another really great way to stay organized is to create source templates and message templates. So for example, when you attach a record on Ancestry, like you find a record and then you save it to your tree, it automatically creates a source citation for you. However, if you have a whole series of birth certificates or marriage certificates that you've ordered from a particular state that they've mailed to you, you're then going to have to scan those and upload them to your tree. And you're going to want to create a source citation for each one of them. And so there's some really great source templates available where you can just say, this is the template. You can stick it into some kind of a doc. I personally use OneNote, and then I can just copy and paste that out of there to create my source citations. Message templates are also a really good idea to keep on hand if you find yourself messaging DNA matches or other people that you find on Ancestry who have family trees or information that you're interested in. I also keep message templates for requests to archives or libraries or vital records offices so that I don't have to reinvent that wheel every single time. Like I said, I use OneNote because then I can organize it by tabs and different sheets within that tab, but I've got colleagues who use Word docs or their Notepad or different systems for doing that particular task. Another tip for staying organized is to record information as you find it. Now I know, because I do this too. Late at night, I get on a roll and I'm digging through hints and I'm doing searches and I'm finding records, and it's really easy to just save it because it's late and I'll look at it later. But the fact of the matter is I usually don't get around to looking at it later. And that's how I sometimes end up with messes in my tree and errors I have to go back and fix, is because rather than actually taking time to view the record, to take some notes about it in my notes on my person in my tree, rather than really analyzing it or comparing it against some of the other records I find, I just think, oh, I'm just going to save it. I'll come back and look at them later. And that doesn't always happen. So my tip to you and to me is just a reminder to record information as you find it, to really take the time to do that. Okay, family history isn't a race to see who has the biggest tree, but it is really important to make sure that we're climbing our own family trees and not someone else's. And the way that often happens is because we don't pay attention to what it is that we're attaching to our trees. My final tip is about staying focused. I get asked this question all the time, and for me, like tidying up and staying organized really kind of revolves around this concept of staying focused. So one of the things that I've been doing lately, and I've been doing it off and on for a couple of years, and now I've really gotten into a habit of it, is I'm a bullet journaler. Even though I love that we have so many digital and technology tools available, there's still something very satisfying about the tactile nature of having a pen in hand and a notebook and physically writing things down in that notebook. And so I've been creating various lists that pertain to my family history research. Some of them are to-do lists. Some of them are to-learn lists. Some of them are lists of things that I've already learned or done, classes I've taken or conferences I've attended. Some of them are lists around tackling a particular research project. As a matter of fact, I've got a video coming up in February that I have planned where we'll be talking about creating research plans. And one of the things that I use my bullet journal for is creating those research plans. So just find a way to keep lists. My only recommendation to you would be don't keep random lists on Post-its or scraps of paper. Those quickly get out of hand and then you feel all cluttered and disorganized again. So my recommendation to you is to get a notebook. Now it doesn't have to be a bullet journal. That's just what I have chosen to use, but a bound something, a spiral notebook or something of that nature is more likely to keep you more organized. Now, all that said, I will be teaching a class on bullet journaling for genealogists at Roots Tech. Roots Tech is the big genealogy conference coming up at the end of February, beginning of March in Salt Lake City. That particular class, I've been asked this question already, is not going to be streamed. So if you are attending Roots Tech, come to the class. If you're not attending Roots Tech, I will be trying to figure out some ways to post some of the tips from those classes that I'm going to be teaching on my Instagram, and maybe I'll be able to get some of that stuff up on the Ancestry blog as well. So when I figure out what I'm doing exactly with that, I will for sure let you all know. Well, that's all I have planned for you today. Hopefully that was useful information. Tidying up is always a good idea. Like I said, it helps us clear up not just our environment, but also some of our brain space. And those of us who've been doing family history for a long time know that we need all the brain space we can get. Putting together a family tree is a lot like a puzzle, and you have to be able to fit the pieces together to make sure that you're climbing your tree and not someone else's. And some of these tips hopefully will help you to clear up some of that clutter so that you can do that even better than you've already been doing it. So until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.